Hello, communications class. Um, I'm doing my role reversal video today. I did it on homeless people because I see them all the time, and I've always been a little bit afraid of homeless people. And I guess maybe that's because I never was really around them growing up. Like in Montana, there was never any homeless people around. I guess I didn't really understand it. I just thought it was kind of like a West Coast thing, or it just came along with a city. But I didn't give it any thought, I guess. So I decided to do homeless people. Right now I'm in Vancouver, and there's this street called Hastings, and it's really concentrated with homeless people. It's just filled with people on the streets, just sitting there selling things. It's a total community, which I thought was really interesting. And they seem really nice. So I always, when I walk through there, people actually will make conversation with you, and there's definitely a drug problem, and that's a little scary, but for the most part, I always felt somewhat safe, and just thought it was an interesting community. So I talked to someone, and he was just sitting there, not really doing anything. He had McDonald's, which was nice. I asked him, my first question was, what do you wish people understood about you? And he seemed kind of confused. It's what? I'm not sure why he felt confused, but he didn't answer right away. He just said, homelessness isn't a choice, which I thought was kind of sad. Of course it's not a choice, but I think even me, I assume that, you could just get a job anywhere if you really try, but it's not as simple as that. The next question I asked was, tell me about your childhood. I also assumed that people who are homeless, they had a really bad childhood, and maybe they just weren't raised properly, and that's why they became homeless, because they didn't have the tools to become, I guess, functioning in society. The person that I asked the question to, he said that he had a really loving family, and it was okay, but they're not around anymore. His parents are dead, and he doesn't have any siblings, and he just lost contact with his family. So I guess that's why he couldn't fall back on them, as I always thought that if there was a possibility of me being homeless, I could always just live with a family member, but that's not always the case for everyone. The next question I asked him was, what do you think about me? And he just gave me this weird look, and was like, you seem fine. He didn't really elaborate on that at all. It's like, you're just a person. I see tons and tons of people all day. So the next part, I'll talk about what perceptions I had previously before talking to this homeless man. And so I always felt really bad about homeless people, but again, like I said, from Montana, I guess I just didn't really give it any thought until I lived in Bellingham. And then even the homeless people in Bellingham are different than the homeless people in Seattle, and I felt like in Seattle they didn't really talk to me as much, but in Bellingham they would usually say something if I was walking by. And then now that I live in Portland, I feel like almost a worse homeless problem, because they're able to stay in tents on the street, and it's really that's where they live. It's right there, right outside of buildings, and there's concentrated areas as well, but people aren't really telling them to move. But in Seattle, a lot of the homeless camps are being moved or pushed outside of the city more. And then it's interesting, in Vancouver, the homeless problem seems to be totally concentrated on Hastings Street. So that's interesting. The next question that I'm answering for myself is, what shortcuts did I take previously for homeless people. And I asked the question, tell me about your childhood, because I just assumed that all homeless people had a horrible childhood and that's why they're homeless. And then what did I learn? I definitely learned that, you know, it's horrible to say this, I feel, but I mean, homeless people, they are people, and that they need affection and love just like anyone else. And that's something that they lack. And I mean, in part of it, I think, is because of drugs, and they use that to fill that void almost. I mean, everyone wants some sort of affection and closeness. And they definitely have that in their community. I mean, I see it. When I was walking down Hastings, I actually saw a couple of people like laying on the street on the ground together under a blanket, and I'm sure it's really warm. And I mean, there has to be relationships with being homeless. I mean, it's probably easier to be with someone and try to like figure it out together than to be on your own. So I definitely learned a lot. It's really hard. I mean, another person said that just like a daily thing that they struggle with is just trying to be dry. Just like being on the West Coast, it's really rainy and things get pretty soggy. So that was very valid, I thought, and yeah, I learned a lot. I want to do more for helping them. It's really hard to know what to do or how to help them. But thank you for listening, and